Here we go.
You're listening to Robin Flan's Drummer Interviews, the #1 drum radio show in all of Los Angeles,
the world, the galaxy.
I'm Robin Flans, and this is Robin Flans Drummer Interviews, and this interview is sponsored by ePad Practice Pads, the only drum practice pad made with Enduraflex playing surface. And I'm here with my co-host and partner in crime, Ed Eblin.
You can't prove that partner in crime thing, but welcome everybody.
I can.
Yeah. Glad you're here, and it's a great one today. So let's get to it.
It is a great one because our guest today is really interesting. His name's Michael Jochum, and anybody who can go from playing the theme from Happy Days to touring with Korn and playing with Denver's premier country band definitely catches my attention. Add into the mix some physical, interesting kind of ailments and, some situations. And he's got a lot of really good information to impart. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Michael on. And I want to know, Michael, how that first session, was it your very first session for Happy Days? Was that the one?
Actually, first of all, thanks for having me, Robin and Ed. And please feel free to chime in anytime. I'll just kind of give you some perspective. So, growing up in Los Angeles, graduating from Burbank High School in '76, I literally got my very first session in Los Angeles was a TV film session, which, anyone in Los Angeles, any drummer, any musician in Los Angeles knows that the TV and film world is a coveted world in the sense that you can really make a good living if you start carving out your niche in that scene. And I did indeed. My very first session wasn't for Happy Days, but it was for The Love Boat.
Whoa!
And that would have been '77.
And how did that? How does a young pup get a frickin' TV session? Right.
So literally, I was 18 years old, and I had just been sort of scuffling around a bit, doing some jazz gigs. I honestly had this very sort of misguided idea that I would be able to make a living as a jazz drummer, which it happens for a lot of our great players. But I also realized that at 18 that if I was really going to be able to make a living doing this drumming thing, that I'm going to have to do something else. And I can't quite remember how it happened, but it all really works in conjunction with any of the TV film stuff and any of the gigs that you get are really in conjunction with the composer himself who would request you, as well as the contractor who works for that composer who starts hiring these guys. So it's just sort of this, you get a lot of traction when you start associating yourselves with these guys. And somehow it was like, hey, I hear that you're really good, and you're a young, upstart of a drummer, and I'll tell you what, I showed up to this Love Boat session, and I just anticipated there was going to be a rhythm section, for all you musician guys, rhythm section, right? we know we got maybe a 4-piece rhythm section, and I show up at Evergreen Studios in Burbank, which is still there,
right?
It's an industry standard of a recording studio where there's tons of TV and film work. For the 9 a.m. call, of course, I show up, and I'm so anxious. I show up, like at 8 o'clock or 7:45. I don't even know if the studio was open yet. It may have been. But and I walk into the recording room, the huge sound stage. And this is in the olden days, you guys, when, they would actually pull a screen down and you'd watch.
Yeah.
The film. I was just right at the very edge of things starting to become more digitized, so that you didn't have that screen, and you'd have a guy up in the loft running the film.
Right.
So I walked in there, and there was it was set up for an entire orchestra.
Oh,
of course, if you listen to the track, of the Love Boat or a lot of those shows, it was like a full orchestra. Those were the days when, if there wasn't a staff orchestra, there would be, an 80 or 100-piece orchestra doing a lot of the scoring. And I, a young kid, my drums, I brought my own drums to the session, I remember, because I didn't have a cartage company. I mean, why would I, And sure enough, from there, and what ended up happening during that course of time, what would happen was that you would play, the call would be for the Love Boat, let's say, but the composer, if the composer was doing several other shows, he would fold in a cue from Happy Days or from Joni Loves Chachi,
right?
Or some of the other sitcoms that were happening at the time. So that was kind of the start.
Wow!
And I have to say that became a dear friend of mine, Mr. Russell, as I call him. He always insisted I call him Shelley, but Shelley Russell was the guy who was just instrumental, so to speak. No pun intended. In really giving me my start as a studio guy.
That is amazing, Michael. I can't even fathom an 18-year-old walking into that kind of situation. I mean, that was like Jeff Porcaro. I mean, that's crazy.
And interestingly enough, and Robin, I saw that you went to Birmingham High School, right?
I did.
So you knew a lot of that whole crowd, and it's a crowd that I grew up about maybe 5 years, maybe 7 years behind the Porcaro brothers and that whole.
Well, they went to Grant. They went to Grant High School.
I knew they went to Grant, but I know that. But everybody kind of knew each other in the Valley.
Yeah. It was the
growing
Valley.
Up. And,
sure.
And I took timpani lessons from Joe. And I would be taking timpani lessons from Joe, and I would be hearing Jeff, practicing in the other room.
Oh my
gosh! And I would walk in there on occasion and say, "Hey, it's Jeff Porcaro." And I'd walk in there, and he'd be like, and I'd be, "What are you studying, man? What book are you reading?" So he says, "I don't study out of books, man. I don't look at books. I don't read that well. It's not my thing." And here's what he said that was so pivotal for me, and I got to tell you, I know I'm sharing a lot of information.
That's okay. Go.
But Jeff said he would say, he said, "Look, man, all I do is I play to records. I put a record on, and I put my headphones on, and I play to the record. That's what I do." And years later at a clinic, I would hear him saying that. I don't like to solo. I just like to play time. And I would always just practice to records. And you know what? Ever since then, since that little moment, I would always practice to records, even though I had to learn how to read. Because the year after, like, let's say 79, I know I'm giving you a lot of info here. It was 79, the middle part of 79, I got a call from Frank Zappa. So do you want me to tell that quick story?
Yeah, because not everybody had read it on Facebook. It was a great story.
So real quick, I'll do the best I can. Ed, I hope you don't mind me sort of monopolizing.
And I know
You go right ahead.
I actually know that Ed didn't read this one on Facebook, so it's a good one.
I would have been. I'm pretty sure I would have been 19. Okay, and he was hearing about me through some other people, and I don't remember. There was somebody specific who told Frank about me, and I get a call, and I was barely still living at my parents' house. And sure enough, the rotary phone rang, and I went back to the back of the kitchen and picked up the rotary phone that was hanging on the wall, and it was Frank's voice. I mean, it was Frank Zappa. It's like, "Mike, this is Frank. I hear you're a really good player. I wonder if you want to come up to my house in Laurel Canyon and audition for the band." And I'm like, sure. When? Where? So, yeah. Right. And thank God I was a really good reader. Now, I got to qualify that by saying one quick as a note. The most incredible reader I have ever known on drums is, of course, Vinnie Colaiuta.
Of course.
Nobody has ever been. I mean, the guy is superhuman. I had another friend of mine, a jingle writer, Mark Villa, a great jingle writer who I probably did thousands of jingles for, who always said, "Vinny is overqualified for everything."
Easy to believe.
And he's exactly right. He's probably one of the only guys I can say that, I mean, and he's the kind of guy, and this is a true story by Steve Vai told this story about Vinny, where he would be able to, like, read through, let's just say the black page, for instance, which is, by the way, Frank put right in front of me at the audition. But he would be able to read through the black page like with one hand, have a bite of sushi and adjust his glasses at the same time.
Yeah.
and Steve, it wasn't quite like that, but Steve told the story, and that it kind of like that. That was the subtext of it.
Yep.
But anyway, so I ended up going up there at the appointed time and date to
right.
a beautiful Laurel Canyon place, and I think I don't remember who the bass player was, but I believe that it was Vi playing at the audition, and it was me, and I know for sure it was Chad Wackerman, and I cannot remember the other drummer, but Chad would have been about my age, maybe a little younger. I'm trying to remember. I think Chad's like 2 years younger than me. Anyway,
wow.
So Chad didn't get the gig.
Whoa.
So it wasn't that at that point for some reason, because he fucking killed it.
Oh, whoa.
I mean, I did a pretty good job, but when it came to the black page, I actually turned to Frank after my assault on the black page, and I did okay, but I turned to him and I go, hey, you know what? If I could just take this home, he's like, no, we don't take anything home here. That's exactly what it was like.
No redos.
No, nobody takes. There's no practice time. You just either do it now or you don't do it at all. So anyway, it was kind of like that was my note to self to go, hey, you know what? I need to just kind of abandon that stuff right now and focus on my studio career, and that's essentially what I did. For the next 25 years.
Wow. Did that, aside from the fact that it put you in a certain direction, was that heartbreaking? Was that just a revelation? What was that moment for you?
It was. There was a certain amount of this idea and this concept, I guess, where I could sort of, the two would intermingle and would continue to integrate with each other. But and those were the days when, you could be doing studio sessions all day long, and then you'd see it all the time, Robin, that you'd see all the great musicians that were doing all the studio work of the day playing at Dante's that night.
Right.
Or playing at remember the Sound Room or Le Cafe or any joints in Los Angeles? I played all those a million times with, tons of people.
Right.
But, here's the thing. It's like, how long can you really hack it out as a jazz player trying to carve out a living just doing that?
Sure.
I knew that it was a kind of a dead end, and especially at 20 when I had my first baby. It was like, for me, it was all over. It's like, now I need to take care of a family.
Wow.
So that was a huge part of it.
You were
and,
young.
My first drum teacher would tell me, he said, Michael, the last thing you want to do, you've got a great career ahead of you. Don't ever have a family. Well,
Surprise!
Right?
Yeah, okay.
Words of wisdom in a way, but once this the responsibility of children came to be, I knew that I had to really do something and do it successfully.
Absolutely.
To make a living for my family.
So what you said, teacher? What were your formal studies?
So through, I only had one drum teacher, and he was an older jazz guy. John Tirabasso is his name, and certainly not a famous name, but really influential in just the flow of my playing and having a deeper understanding of what the role of a drummer is in a band with support, and that the bottom line is that it's always all about what I can do for my fellow musicians first. And then everything else is sort of the icing on the cake, and all that stuff. But as far as formal training, to be honest, I really didn't have a whole lot beyond him and my timpani lessons with Joe, because when you do orchestra and film gigs and TV gigs, you've got to at least be a utility guy.
Right.
So I've bullshitted my way so much into bell parts and vibe parts I can't even tell you. It's like I'm the drum set guy, but then one cue, I have to go over and play that vibraphone or play that timpani. I'm like, okay, well, I hope it's simple stuff. As a matter of fact, I did. So the show Futurama.
Oh yeah.
And of course The Simpsons. So I did all of those shows.
Wow.
And I would always have, invariably, I would just be panicked coming to the studio, sitting on my drum kit, looking through my folder of music, and seeing my cues, and then all of a sudden, oh, timpani here, oh my God, bells here. Every break I would be going over and practicing, but I made it through, and to be honest, all the great percussionists, I know you have these round tables of guys, which I really loved, those conversations of, how everybody sort of integrates, and I had so much help from the Mike Fishers and the Steve Englanders and, all the great percussionists
Right.
that would just sort of nurse me through
Right.
all this stuff as the drum set guy.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, that film work is incredibly intense and intricate and, not easy because there's a lot of pressure. The cues there are multitudes of cues, and you never want to be the one holding up the bunches of people and the amount of money that's going into this thing.
And I mean the other, yeah, and you're talking about a lot of money, a lot of players,
Yep.
And you're also, the bottom line is that, you make one mistake, great. You make two, not so good. You make three, and trust me, you're not, for the most part, you're not going to get that.
Yep.
That next call.
That's right.
It's just the way it is.
Yep.
So yeah, there is a lot of pressure, but I've done a pretty good job, and thank God for the Film Musician Secondary Fund and my motion picture check.
Wow.
Even though I haven't done that work, literally, it's been. It's been a good 12 years since I've done any film and TV work, but my life went in a completely different direction, as I think maybe from some of my other stories.
Yeah.
You know.
So, yeah. Indeed. And we've got all
I don't
sorts
know
of
what that is.
bells ringing and things going off here. What was that? Well, that was an interesting...
No, those are truth meters, and it turns out Michael's telling the exact truth about everything, which is great. No.
So you go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that basically it's interesting in the 70s when I came up, and true to the early 80s, you had two different sets of musicians, and really you had guys that would stay in town and do all the recording, and then you would have the guys that would go on the road and do the recording, the touring work. Rarely did the two meet in the middle somewhere. Because what would end up happening is there were so many good players at that time, and the road wasn't narrowed enough that when a Paul Jackson, I hate to use other people as an example. Let's just say if I were to go on the road, I would come back to nothing.
That's right. That's right.
Because
Absolutely.
there were too many good players that would immediately be taking that seat.
Sure.
So it was always a really rough decision for sidemen to make that leap,
of course,
to tour, and it really wasn't with the exception of some minimal touring with the jazz violinist Doug Cameron and a few other people that I had done a bunch of records for and did some like weekend or 5 or 7 days. I hadn't done any extensive touring
right
until the latter part of '86 when I got called to do a Jackson Browne record. And that was actually through my dear friend Kevin McCormick, who recommended great bass player, who recommended me to Jackson. And I went in and did the record, and the record part went really well. It was the World in Motion record with him. And we did some benefit tours. And to be perfectly honest, Rob, and it's really fascinating, for me as being primarily a recording musician, and I really thrive in that environment. There's something so methodical and pragmatic and in a way intellectual about having to dissect everything about how you play,
right?
Because you're so under the microscope,
right.
It has everything to do with sound and flow and feel and time, of course. Everything about it. And when you tour, it's a little bit different. And as it should be, it's a little bit more of a free for all, and it's a little bit more uncontrolled. And I was sort of thrust into this on the road environment with with Jackson, and the most gracious, wonderful person that you'll ever want to meet in this life. But at the same time, to be honest, I was struggling every night with this thing. I was like constantly second-guessing myself, constantly thinking I was on the outside looking into the gig instead of being embodied in the gig.
Interesting.
And my energy was felt,
Interesting.
So it was at the same time that I got the Jackson Browne gig, I was also doing the Tracy Ullman show, the first Tracy Ullman show that was on Fox that introduced The Simpsons.
Right.
And I essentially left that show where we were the house band. Another one of the most coveted gigs in town, by the way, is being the house band for any television show.
Right.
Talk with the guys that do Dancing with the Stars. That's still on, and those guys bank the money. I mean, it's a huge deal. Not to mention the residuals. So it was a big leap for me to be on the road, and I never felt comfortable.
And interesting.
Subsequent to that, I had some other, drug abuse issues that sort of collided with that whole scene, and it certainly is a new story. I'm not inventing the wheel with this story, reinventing the wheel. But that.
We're gonna. I want to get inside of that in a moment. We're going to actually take a short break, and I want to get inside that one as we come back. Let's take a pause for the cause.
If you could design your own drum practice pad, what would it feel like? Warming up on ePads provides a natural transition from practice pad to drum set. The benefits of ePad include quiet playing surface and shock-resistant properties that help reduce the risk of stress-related injuries. ePad offers the perfect feel and energy return for developing speed, endurance, and control. You will meet the challenge of the weaker hand with ePad. At ePad, we know the need for speed, control, and endurance. Get your chops together with ePad's EnduraFlex playing surface. Practicing with ePads builds your finger, wrist, and forearm strength and helps you gain better control and endurance. Into feel? Well, ePads replicate the response and feel of a real drum. Our Pro Deluxe knee pad is portable, convenient, and lightweight. Perfect for the beginner, intermediate, or pro touring drummers. At ePad, our EnduraFlex practice surface was perfected to eliminate extreme bounce and unrealistic rebound. Get your licks in with our Strike Zone and Pro Deluxe knee pads. ePad, your source for high-quality drum set practice pads and accessories.
Don't forget to check that out at epadco.com. That's epadco.com. And if you're in the Southern California area, you can purchase them at Pro Drum Shop. And also just like to quickly, shamelessly plug my own new website, robinflansmedia.com. And I've been sort of offering some writing services, bios, press releases, liner notes, all sorts of stuff. So feel free to check out some samples at my new website. And with that, I'm going to go back to a very pivotal time in your life, Michael. When did your struggle with addiction start?
Well, I mean, it was kind of an ongoing thing in my 20s. I mean, it certainly is not a new story for musicians. And, my struggles began, in my late 20s or so. And right around that time, as I said before the break, my tenure with Jackson Browne had begun with, one of the most incredible groups of musicians I've ever had the opportunity to play with. Including, the great Bob Glaub on bass, and, Kevin Dukes on guitar, and Craig Durkee, who's been with Jackson for years, as well as Scott Thurston, who's now been in Teddy's band, I think, for 20 years, on keyboards and guitar, and also co-producing the record that I did with Jackson, a record that I'm still really proud of. The studio sessions were great. When I went on the road, there was something, and it was just a point in my life where I was not complete. I was going through a really the end of a horrible marriage. I already had 2 daughters, which was the blessing of that marriage. But as far as that marriage, it was over. Like I said, not an unusual story repeated by a lot of folks.
Right.
But I felt, but I always felt like I wasn't doing the job that I needed to do for Jackson and the band. And it was pretty apparent, because I mean, there's nothing worse than getting that call to the hotel room, in the middle of the night and having conversations with a guy who you respect immensely. And him telling you, hey man, what's up? How can I help you? What's going on with you? Why is it not happening? It was great in the studio, and now we're transitioning to being on the road. What can I do to help you?
Oh my God,
And
that
honestly,
must have been awful.
There was nothing. Yeah, I mean, awful, but at the same time, it was necessary. Yeah, I would like to say that at that point, I was able to pull my shit together because of it. It took me many more years, and I'll kind of get to that because it leads me into something else. But basically, what happened was, and you know me, Robin, you've seen some of my stories.
Sure.
I consider myself to be a bit of a storyteller, and I don't necessarily wear my heart on my sleeve, but I also believe that some of these stories that I share will help other people who are maybe struggling.
Absolutely.
With
and I give you a lot of credit and a lot. It takes courage, and I really give you a lot of credit, Michael, for sharing it, because I know it's coming from a really, really, really genuine place.
Right, yeah, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words. And essentially the death knell of that was Jackson. It was one of the most beautiful moments of my life, to be honest with you. We were in Seattle, and I'll never forget it. And because I was just in Seattle with the Rough Cuts, the band I'm currently playing with, in last April, and I went to the same diner. He invited me to his hotel room again at the very end of our West Coast swing. And he invited me to go to this diner with him, literally in the middle of the night. It was probably 3 a.m. And we went, and not a word was said between us in the car on the way over to this diner. And we sat at the diner counter, and he ordered a piece of pie, and I ordered a piece of pie. I remember I had a piece of, I think it was apple, and he had lemon meringue. And we sat there in complete silence and ate our pie. And ate our pie. And the next day was our last show. I don't remember. It must have been, on that downward slope to Los Angeles somewhere. I think it was in Los Angeles. And I think at the Shrine Auditorium, actually. I think it was the last show. And after that show, I was essentially summarily dismissed, and for good reason, because I was not the drummer that I would want to be. I was certainly not the drummer at that point that was there for what Jackson wanted, and it took me some time to recover from that. But in that sense of recovery, I did have an understanding that there was something that I needed to fix. And then subsequent to that, it was 90. I went into treatment. And I did a 30-day treatment there, and it still didn't take. And long story short, I've been sober 12 years, but from that's kind of a whole nother bit of sobriety from those substances on the road, which you can probably guess. I don't have to, spell it out for you.
Yeah.
It's been since around, in and around 93 that I eliminated all of that out of my life, and my life started to change from that point on.
Wow.
I integrated myself essentially back into the world of studio recording, and I found myself, to be honest, constantly on the outside looking in instead of on the inside, being on the inside of that world. I never quite felt situated in that world. I always felt like, but there's Vinnie Colaiuta, man. It's like, I'll never play as good as Vinnie. Why should I even try? I mean, that's how my mind worked at that point. I was like, it's futile for me to even try to carve out, and I went through that for many years,
right?
Until literally it was 2000, and I was in my late 30s, and let me go here first. So I was born with a neural tube defect called spina bifida.
Right.
To make a very long story short, what it is essentially, it's a non-closure of the neural tube at the base of the spine at birth.
Right.
They fixed it in 1958, but it started rearing its ugly head in my late 30s. Manifesting in pain. So I literally have no sensation from the bottom of my feet all the way up. When I play the drums today, I have to look at my feet to make sure that I'm making contact with the bass drum pedal and the hi-hat pedal.
Oh, my God.
I have to watch. And it's the same way in which I would drive. I have to watch like split-second, millisecond looks at my feet to make sure that I'm touching the right pedals. It's very odd.
Oh, my God.
Right. So if you understand what a peripheral neuropathy is, like what diabetics have, it's the same idea. Tethered cord syndrome, complex regional pain syndrome, and trust me, this is not a boohoo Michael thing. It's a real huge part of my story. So as a result of all that, of course, the Western docs started putting me on all these medications.
Oh,
so
God.
That started a whole nother world of that. So in 2000, I was getting ready to move because I thought, well, it seemed reasonable that the road had really started to narrow in the recording industry. I was still doing sessions. As a matter of fact, I was the first call sub. I don't know if you or Ed remember. You remember The Late Show with Joan Rivers?
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, now that is a show that literally people that were called to do, Mark Hudson was the musical director,
Right.
great guy. And people were called from all over the country to come and do that show. The lead trumpet player, the guys in the sax section, a lot of LA guys, of course. And everybody thought that was going to be like the next Tonight Show, that it would last
Right.
for,
Right.
the next 40 years. And of course, the show only lasted 18 months.
Mm.
But that being said, I had the opportunity to be, and check this out, I was Vinny's sub.
Oh,
Wow.
my.
So imagine what that was like.
Wow.
On the recommendation of Randy Waldman, who was Mark's keyboard player on the show. I'm sure you guys are familiar with all these names.
Of
so
course.
I'm just
Oh, of
shooting them out
course.
there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Randy's a dear friend of mine and a great guy. And he recommended, Michael Jochum, great reader. And then John Rosenberg was the contractor. And he was so good to me. And I was the first call sub for that show.
Oh, my God.
And I'll never forget it. It was John, who was the lead trumpet player. Oh, God. He's the lead trumpet player on Dancing with the Stars. And I'll remember it as soon as... And he's also now, I think, the president of the Musicians Union. Anyway, great trumpet player, great guy. He would always say when I would get there, and this is a very glib comment, trust me. He'd be like, Michael, I'm so glad you're here. And I would say, why? What do you mean? You have Vinny Colaiuta, one of the finest drummers ever in the world, ever. He said, because Vinny is no help at all. And when he said that, I laughed because I totally understood what he meant. Because Vinny doesn't desire to help anybody. Have you ever seen the YouTube clips of Vinny's intros to Vinny's late night theme drum fills?
Yeah.
Right, you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Right,
Yeah.
So I keep on scouring YouTube to find some of my Michael Jochum theme intro fills into like the big band thing, the penultimate end of that theme, but I can't find them anywhere. There's a whole bunch of clips of Vinny, and he's like all over. Of course, he's all over the place, and everybody's barely hanging up. But of course, as usual, he's right on the money, So every time, it was Rick Baptist. That's the lead trumpet player, fantastic guy and unbelievable player.
Okay.
And he would always say, "Michael, he's no help at all." And I knew what he meant. Of course, and everybody in the band would laugh. But anyway, Vinny and I ended up in the year 2000. When I thought, okay, you know what? And understand this is sort of emblazoned by lots of drugs that were being prescribed by Western docs to try to mitigate some of my pain, so I could just function with my family. I mean, by that time I had 4 kids. I had huge responsibilities and financial responsibilities, and I had to keep things moving. I had just finished the gig with John Tesh. So my friend Freebo, the bass player Freebo, one of my dearest friends, and actually a guy who was pivotal in my final sobriety in 2005, would always tell me, I said, Freebo, I feel like I don't have a niche. I haven't carved out myself as a rock guy or a pop guy or a jazz guy. He would always say, Michael, your strength is in your versatility.
Of course.
And that's the thing that I always recognize as being a studio guy is the versatility. Hal Blaine, of course, would say the same thing. I mean, it was all about that, being able to be as versatile as possible. Because, I ended up being able to carve out a world in live TV, recorded TV.
Right.
But anyway, so in 2000, I thought, okay, here's a good idea. I'll move to Colorado. Because I'm so sick of the music business. I was sick of myself, to be honest. I needed a change. But during that course of time, in making the move, I was also called by Dateline, which anybody who knows the recording business in Los Angeles knows the Dateline mavens, as I call them.
Right.
Mike.
Right.
Call from Dateline, TV, film. I think it was John Powell was the composer. The film is... what's the film? The two drummers battling each other.
Oh my God! Yeah, I just saw it like last year.
I'm completely blanking on it right now, and I've only told this story a million. Well, not
Wasn't
a million
it? Was
times,
at the same time that the other drum movie came out there? I think there were two of them going on.
Drumline.
Drumline.
With the actors. Okay, Drumline. TV call for Drumline, and we need you, and we're going to call Vinny Caluta as the other drummer. So check this out.
Wow.
We show up to the sound stage, and it was at Paramount M, one of the biggest sound stages in town. Just Vinny and I, and the request was that we had literally 8 core snare drums, Piatti cymbals, different sized bass drums, tri-toms. It's everything that would be in the drum line. If you've seen the film, you know what goes on. It's a constant back. Nick Cannon is one of the lead characters, right?
Right.
So I show up. Vinny's late, but nobody ever cares if Vinny's late. But I show up right on time, and John, the composer, a great composer. I think he did all the great Brad Pitt and George Clooney films with that really cool score. They robbed the casinos. Those films.
Oh,
he's that guy.
Right. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And there's not a note written for the drums.
Oh my
Not a
gosh.
note. And here's the thing about post production: is anybody that knows about post stuff, what they want to do is they want to enhance the sound of the drums that are on the field, drums that are in the practice room. They want to make them sound better, or duplicate what that sound would be in that particular medium, right? So that's what post-production is all about. That's why they have... And Nick Cannon was not a drummer.
Right.
He looked like he was drumming,
right, of
but,
course.
He wasn't.
Right.
So Vinny and I, meticulously, mostly Vinny, would watch the screen and transcribe all the drum parts out.
Whoa.
So all those drum battles, all the core stuff that you see are all transcribed by Vinny and I, mostly Vinny, because he was just he could just do it like in his sleep, just like he wouldn't even need to listen to it a couple times, just write it right out, right?
Wow.
It would take me a little more time. So here's what ended up happening, though. It was a 5-day call, right? It was a 5-day call. So we were on the call for 3 days together, and Vinny and I were doing drum battles back and forth. When you see those guys on the screen, that was Vinny and I going back and forth in these drum battles.
Wow.
Really? Wow.
Me with Vinny. And he would be like, he's so gracious. I mean, he's the sweetest guy in the world.
Yeah, I
He'd be
know.
like, hey, Michael, do you want to take this little solo piece? And I'm like, no, it's okay. You can do it. You go ahead and do this one, Vinny. It's all good, And I mean, he's just the guy that's just fucking masterful.
I know.
It's the only way I can describe
know.
his playing. So anyway, but here's the thing. When Vinny would get another call, a better call, let's say Sting called or whoever,
Right.
Vinny would go do that call. So I was left alone
Okay.
after the 3rd day to finish up this, and the 5-day call turned into a 12-day call.
Oh my gosh.
So there I was for another 7 days, and I literally had to move during this course of time, my family, everything that I had in my house.
Oh, Michael.
You know, all the way to Colorado during that time. So that was that.
Oh, Michael.
And then I moved to Colorado, and where I sit today. And then that leads me up to.
Wow.
Do you want me to go on about this? Because I can kind of give you a little chronology. So Robin, I really had this belief that I could continue to drive from Colorado, spend like 4 or 5 days doing TV and film work, because I was still doing The Simpsons and all these different shows, and stay there, and then, you know, drive back, and it wouldn't drive me crazy, and it wouldn't put me in a complete state of utter just despair and depression and exhaustion. And I tried it for a few years. Really? And it just did not serve me very well.
No, I wouldn't
I finally counted it, how many times I made the drive. It's 1,070 miles from here to, let's say Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. It's 1,070 miles, 14 hours. I did that drive 57 times back and forth.
Oh, my God.
I know.
No.
But here's the thing, you know, once you're gone from Los Angeles, people don't care anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have awesome musicians that I'm going a little bit ahead of my story, but you know, everybody still, you know, recognized what I had done, what I've achieved. But if you're not there, if you're not present, you're not working.
Right.
It's just the way it is.
So let's go forward here. I'm so curious, with the reputation that you had in the recording industry, and now we're going to go into, you know, why, well, there's two whys here. Why did the folks from Korn reach out to you when they needed someone to fill in on the drum seat? And why did you, with your touring feeling about touring, accept?
Well, do you want to take a break before I go into this story? Because this is actually leads me to present, kind of.
No, I don't.
No? Okay. So here's what happened. A dear friend of mine is a great composer named Richard Gibbs, who owns the Woodshed Studio in Malibu, a beautiful studio that he carved into the back of his house, basically, another whole structure. Which, you know, has the likes of now Barbra Streisand and Coldplay and all sorts of folks. I had been doing over the course of time. He was an ex-Oingo Boingo guy, and I met him in '83 when we formed a band with Joe Toronto, great singer, called Zuma 2. And he essentially left Oingo Boingo to do this band. We did a record. The record didn't do well. Richard carved his way into the film composing industry and started doing really well. I don't know, 20 films with Richard over the years. And then he got his big break it would have been 2003-ish. We did the music for Queen, the soundtrack for the music Queen of the Damned. Of course, the late Chester, you know, Chester, who else? There was a bunch of artists, including Jonathan Davis of Korn, that contributed to that soundtrack. They essentially, Richard wrote songs, or they were written by other people, that they sang on the Queen of the Damned soundtrack. And that's how Jonathan met Richard. Okay, so that's that connection. And then in 2005, so it was 2005, the band was in turmoil. Essentially, Head had left the band. The second guitar player, to James, to Monkey, had left the band because of his drug addiction. Turned to Jesus to get clean. Needed a break. Did that. David, the original drummer of the band, the drummer who, by the way, I thought really was the drummer for that band. You know, the band was formed in '92. A very solid rock drummer. That band was a rock band.
Right.
It's not, you know, they called it nu metal. I always thought it was just a heavy rock band. I had no idea who Korn was. It's not a music that I had ever listened to. I'm a jazz guy. I listened to Michael Brecker, you know. I mean, Jack DeJohnette. I mean, Antonio Sanchez. Those are the guys I listened to. I didn't know who Korn was from Adam, you know. But Richard called me and said, look, I've got this really strange idea and request. Jonathan wants me to do something really different with the band. They're going through a lot of changes, and he wants to make some changes and just sort of ruffle everybody's feathers about what Korn is and what it isn't, and add a second drummer percussionist guy. And I was like, okay, well, great. Let me, do I audition or what? He said, yeah, they're doing auditions. They've already auditioned like 25 guys. And they haven't found a guy. Because the thing about doing the double drum thing, and this is something I've actually done quite a bit of, which is kind of interesting. Boy, it's a tough one, man. I mean, you look at the Allman Brothers or the Dead or any of those guys, it works because those guys have integrated so completely into each other's playing that it's almost seamless.
Right,
you know?
right.
So the double drum thing was something that I kind of had an idea about, and I'm really good at mixing and matching chameleon-like when I need to. Just integrating my way into whatever I need to do as a player, that versatility part, you know?
Right.
So the heavy metal thing and all that I wasn't put off by any of that. It's just like, look, it's just another gig to me, you know? So I went back to Los Angeles, auditioned, and my first thought when I sat there during the audition and played with David was that, man, this is really loud. I even turned to Monkey and I go, that's really loud. He said, hey, it's rock, man. It's rock, you know? And I'm like, okay, I get it. So, yeah, I got the gig. And we ended up, here's what it was. I mean, essentially, they gave me free reign to go out and buy whatever I wanted to buy or get endorsed by to supplement what David was doing on the drum set still. So I went out and we got, huge gongs, we got crotales, we got udus and drums and big drums and little drums, and I had a small sort of a stand-up drum set that I was using when I would double David's parts. I mean, it was really fun. There was something super cool about that was different with the touring thing.
Okay.
By that time, I was completely sober. It was 2005.
Right.
So I've been sober 12 years, July 14th, from everything, including Western medicine drugs, because they weren't working. That's a whole other story. But anyway, so that my life was really a lot different, and I felt really comfortable being kind of the second guy. I wasn't the guy that was in the band. I was just the guy that was still the sideman guy. So there was something about that felt a lot more comfortable to me, I guess, with the touring part. I wasn't in this limelight.
Right.
I wasn't the rock star guy. I was just one of the guys, and it turned out to be three guys that supplemented Korn at that time. The keyboard player is still with them as an integral member of the band. There was also a background singer and me, basically. But during that course of time, David continued to be dissatisfied with touring, and he quit the band.
Wow.
So he left the band
Whoa.
at the end of 2006.
Okay.
It was right before they were going to do this huge MTV Unplugged special, which maybe you've seen some of that, Robin. I don't know. It was actually really fun. But then, okay, now what are they going to do? Now I'm like the drummer in Korn.
Wow.
I'm like the only guy. I'm the last man standing.
Whoa.
So as the last man standing, they wanted to create something that was really different. So I put together a little percussion drum set rig for the MTV Unplugged special in New York. And it stands, honestly, as one of my most favorite musical experiences because Richard, who was still involved with the band, was able to orchestrate all of these Korn tunes. Robert Smith and The Cure was a guest, and he was awesome. We did a couple of Cure songs. So that was that. And then it was like, okay, now we're going to find a, quote, permanent drummer for the band because I was still kind of the second guy. And that's when Joey Jordison came into the mix.
Right.
So Joey Jordison came into the mix from Slipknot, of course. Interesting fellow. I have no particular comment about him, except that we did tour together for a good part of that next summer. And then after that, essentially, we came back to the States. And then I'm just going to finish this part of it. And then when we came back to the States, Jonathan decided that he wanted to do his own solo project.
Right.
So he retained myself, Miles Mosley, a great acoustic bass player who has his own career as a artist, the great Shankar, Peter Gabriel's violinist, and his own solo artist, and the late Shane Gibson, who passed away at a very shocking at 30 years old from alcohol. Essentially, his organs failed. Very sad. Great guy, struggling, but anyway, it was a fantastic band. And we did 2 tours, States tour, a European tour, and then another States tour. But I was done. I mean, I had it. After the Korn gig, I really honestly had enough money, with that and my Musicians Union pension. Thank God. I had been doing that TV and film work since I was 17 years old, and socked away money in a pension, Right. So in 2009, and this was, the pivotal point and kind of leads us to where we're at sort of right now. You want me to tell you real quick?
Yeah, you stopped.
Okay, so in 2009, yes, it was August 18th of 2009. It was at Ozfest in Texas. And it was a hot motherfucker day, like it is in Texas in August.
Yep.
And we were playing in front of it was Jonathan, and we were playing in front of a bunch of rabid, fans in the sweltering heat. And I knew, and I honestly didn't know until I was playing the show that I was going to retire from playing the drums and that I was done. But I knew at the very end of the show that it was the last show that I would ever play, and the last time I would ever pick up a pair of drumsticks. I was completely resigned to that idea in my mind. And I literally, I can picture it now. I walked, and I'm walking just to simulate it right now. I walked to the very front, the very tipping point of the stage with all of my drumsticks, and I tossed them out to the audience one by one, very slowly, very methodically. And even the guys in the band were kind of looking at me like, he'd never done that before. Why is he doing that? I just tossed every one of them out until every one of my drumsticks were gone. And the only thing that I kept in my hand was the leather stick bag that my grandmother had bought for me when I was 13 years old, because she said, Michael, you're going to be a drummer, right? I was like, yeah, it's the only thing I ever want to do, Grandma. And she bought me that stick bag when I was 13 years old. I've had it all this time. That was the only thing I hung on to. I literally got in the bus. I put all of my equipment. I had maybe 12 drum kits, bags of cymbals. Multiple bags of cymbals from Zildjian, from Paisi, from Meinl, from Sabian. I put everything on the market. I got home to, at that point, Colorado, got back to Colorado. I sold everything through eBay, through, other sources, neighborhood, website selling forums, and whatever I couldn't sell, I literally gave away. The last thing that I sold was a little tiny, really cool, like an 8, 10, 12, 14, 16-inch bass drum DW kit, Ringo, Oyster Pearl wrapped kit. I sold it for $300 to a guy down the street, and I gave him a whole bag of Michael Jochum drumsticks, stick-proof drumsticks.
Oh, my God.
And, and I just, what I couldn't sell, I literally gave away.
Jeez.
And I retired, and I did not pick up the drumsticks from 2009, from that August of 2009 until November of 2014.
And what made you pick them back up?
I became a yoga teacher. Took teacher training, and I've always practiced yoga off and on throughout the years. I became a yoga teacher. I really thought that that's what my life was going to be at this point. And essentially, drums were not even in my line of fire at all until my wife, we were teaching a yoga class. This is my now wife. This is my third wife. We were teaching a yoga class at a private house, and downstairs in the basement of that house was a drum kit. And I'm like, I kind of looked at it the couple of days that we were teaching, and then like on the third day, I looked at it, maybe I'll just go over and sit down and see how it feels, And I sat down and started playing, and my wife hadn't arrived at the house yet, and she was driving up the cul-de-sac to make it to our house, to this house, and she came and I was playing, and she's like, why are you not playing the drums? Not only was I not playing the drums, I wasn't telling anybody in Colorado that nobody even knew here that I even played the drums.
Wow.
Because I would never, it was something I had to completely let go of.
Right.
For that time,
Right.
Right. And then, it's, I started playing a little more. I had nothing. I had no equipment. I didn't even have drumsticks, Right. I know it sounds so crazy. Now that I even talk about it, it sounds so crazy, So I had to start from the ground up, which was the most awesome thing I have ever had to do as a musician. Because instead of worrying about, well, maybe if I go to the NAMM show this year, I can get an endorsement from this company. Or maybe if I hang out with this guy, it was like, okay, I bought, the first kit that I bought was a Gretsch Renown kit. Simple Gretsch Renown kit from Drum City here in Colorado. Really great little drum shop in Wheat Ridge. And then from there, I started practicing, and it took me about a year. It took me about till the end of 2015 till I felt comfortable sort of putting myself out there again and going, hey, I'm playing again. If any of you LA folks ever need a drummer, because I knew nobody in Colorado. I had never played music in Colorado with the exception of touring in Colorado.
Wow.
I never integrated my way into the Denver music community because I wasn't really playing music here. And when I was playing music, I was out touring and not living here,
Wow.
So, and then and Lawrence Juber and Leland and a bunch of folks started getting me back there to do some sessions and some live gigs. And then I bought another kit and another kit. And
then, how many kits do you have now?
Well, I have two there, and I have two here now.
Wow.
But I feel like so what ended up happening was all kind of posting stuff on Facebook, social media. It can be, I have such a love-hate relationship like I think everybody does with social media, but It's a great tool for kind of putting yourself out there. Some folks said, hey, the Rough Cuts here in Denver are looking for a drummer. I don't know if you are into country music, and quite honestly, I'm not. But I'm the versatile guy, right?
Right.
I'm the guy who can be the chameleon. And they auditioned a bunch of guys. They auditioned me. I ended up getting the gig. And it's been a little over a year that I've been doing that.
Wow. Okay.
And as well as still going back to Los Angeles and doing some gigs there. And I do everything now, on my terms. I don't have to worry about making a substantial living, playing. I do it for the creative flow. I really do it for the art, and to also have the opportunity to share my experiences with other people, who are maybe dealing with some of the same stuff I dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
All of that. That's kind of, leads me to today.
Well, it's a great story, Michael. You've been through. You've had an interesting journey. It's been a really interesting journey. Well, like I said on your Facebook, it's book worthy. You should sit with a tape recorder and sort of ramble into it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of working on that idea of putting together, in a chronological order of some of my, those experiences. I mean, I've had. And people will remind me of this guy or that guy. And it's like, oh, I did a session with Ted Nugent. I'll tell you that story. Or I did a session with this guy or that guy. Or the one time I played with Chick Corea. Or my Jackson Browne story. Or, I've got or even, what's really great now at this point is touring on a level where, look, I'm in a van with two guys and one woman, great musicians, with all of our gear in the back of a 10-passenger van. I haven't done that. I actually have never done that. And now at almost 59 years old, that's what I'm doing. So it really gives you a sense of being the musician that's in the trenches. You've got to be doing it for the love.
Right.
Because it certainly isn't for the money, or the prestige, or whatever.
Yep. It's you're sort of doing things a little bit in reverse here, but it's an interesting, eye-opening experience, I'm sure.
I have if you don't mind, I have a couple of questions for you, Michael, if you don't mind.
Sure, Ed, please.
All right. Well, first of all, when you were talking a little while back about the physical ailments of not being able to feel like your feet, if you were using, your right foot on the bass drum pedal, I assume, and stuff. And unless I missed this, so do you still deal with that on like nowadays that you're playing again?
I do, and I'm also missing my the big toe on my right foot, which is really fascinating. Actually,
wow.
It's a whole nother world. But yeah, as a matter of fact, so here's the thing. As far as the physical stuff, I'll get into that briefly. I've had because I know I've been really talking a lot, but I've had 5 spinal cord surgeries. So people always talk about, how's your back? It's not about my back. It's literally about my spinal cord. So if you can imagine, if you can imagine somebody taking a bungee cord and wrapping it around your spinal cord, at, let's say at L4 and L5, and that's essentially the nerves that go from the brain through the spinal cord that affect the lower half of your body. Mm-hmm. That's what it's like. So not only do I have lack of sensation, that's essentially what a peripheral neuropathy is, I also have pain from the bottom of my feet up as well, which constitutes this, what they call, the acronym is CRIPS. They've labeled it as complex regional pain syndrome, and it's not something that somebody just made up. It's essentially what happens is over time, since it's nerve damage that has occurred at birth, a lot of nerve damage can be healed and properly repaired if it's not long term. But this is nerve damage that happened, almost 59 years ago. So there really is no repair to be done. What they do for my particular issue is imagine when you have this surgery at birth to repair this neural tube defect to make things right, all the scar tissue that's been created.
Oh, boy.
And that's why what it's called tethered cord syndrome, because what happens is the cord becomes tethered in scar tissue. It's like scar tissue becomes wrapped around that point of your surgery,
right.
And that's what causes this feeling of the bungee cord being tightened. So I really can't sit for any length of time before it's just, honestly, it's sometimes it's excruciating. So I have to stand up, I have to move, I have to shift my body as much as possible. But yeah, I still deal with that. Western medicine didn't help. I mean, to be honest, if there was a medication, if there were 5 medications that I could take that would mitigate my pain enough that it would offset the side effects of those medications, right, I would take it. But there just hasn't been,
So what? So does anything help? Does anything help?
So obviously, I have my medical marijuana license.
Right.
I'm a caregiver here in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
I use different salves. I use smokable brands that are specifically geared. The strains are geared specifically towards what I'm dealing with pain-wise. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I've helped a lot of other people with the same kind of issues. My meditation practice helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the only time that I don't feel the pain. When I can internalize, it's kind of a whole other story about my spiritual practice. That helps. But when I'm playing, I'm fully present and fully in the moment, so much so that I do everything I can to separate myself from the pain enough to be able to do my thing as a player. Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm also on Social Security disability because I've paid in, and I have to be. There is no possible way that I could withstand the rigors of being on tour, mm-hmm, of doing all day long recording sessions. I could never do that. I could never do that again. I wish I could, to make a substantial living. But now I do it. It's not a hobby as much as it is like a part-time thing. Mm-hmm. But I also know my limitations.
Right.
Essentially, yeah.
Wow.
So that's. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, it definitely does, and I'm asking you that sort of for I have a couple of little physical things going on with my knee, my right knee actually, and I'm asking for everybody else who is listening. But I was curious about that, and on the upshot of it, I wanted to say to you when you were talking about there's a Vinnie Colaiuta in the world, why should anybody try? I think if you're fortunate enough to be called the guy's sub, you've arrived at the party. So congratulations on that, man. I think that's unbelievable that you've had the circumstance to work with him on so many different things.
I appreciate that, brother. Yeah, and you know what? I actually am forming the sub story about coming in and having to sub for him. I've been the sub guy on a lot of gigs, for like the Rick Muratas and of course the John Robinsons. I've always I've been the second call for a lot of those guys. But to my credit, and I've also been the first call guy on all of those gigs.
Sure.
But and that's just the way it is. I mean, these days, to be honest, I'm just grateful to have 5 children and 5 grandchildren and be happily married and deeply ensconced in my little farmhouse here in Colorado, making my trips to California, seeing my kids, and still being able to play to a degree where I feel like I'm bringing something. I mean, it really is all about the people that we're performing for.
Yes.
And I'm there to be there for them at this point. It's not. I look at it. It's not about me. It's about them. And instead of looking from the outside in, I feel like I'm looking from the inside out now. And that's a big shift in my consciousness. And I don't worry about being the Vinny Calutas or the Mark Guilianas or the Antonio Sanchez's of the world anymore. I look at it, being me and what I can share as a drummer and as a person and as a being, and that's really what it's all about today. And that's a blessing, and I'm grateful.
Yeah,
trust me, I've had an incredible career for all the shit that I've been put through physically, and I'm super grateful for all.
Yeah,
of it,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that's, yeah.
Well, a lot of people would have called it quits when things like that start happening, and it really is about your attitude and the way you look at life, and you've got a full life, and I think it's wonderful that you've got that much to share, because a lot of us who will never get to where you're at, which to me would be sort of like on that Vinny status, totally ensconced in recording and touring and working with that level of other musicians is a thing where it happens maybe once in a while to the average guy. Might get on a gig, luckily, where there's some great players. But that sounds like it was like a pretty big part of your life for most of your career. At a very young age you started. So, I mean, it's...
you're right, Ed, and I appreciate that, and I don't take it for granted for a second. I'm eternally grateful for what I've been able to do,
Yeah, and there's,
absolutely.
Every time I talk to somebody, over the years I've been fortunate because we actually had the first studio roundtable that Robin did, or the LA studio roundtable back in '91. All those guys were at our house, and so to have all of those people sitting on your couch, you keep pinching yourself going, God, I wish I could. The thing I wanted to do mostly was share that with my other drummer friends. Who has Vinny and Harvey and Mike Baird and Steve Schaefer and
Jeff
Porcaro, and all these guys are sitting on the couch eating, just eating food and just carrying on. And you're as a drummer, you're just amazed by that. It's like, oh my God, this guy actually eats a sandwich. I do that every day. I feel like I'm a part of it. So yeah, it was an incredible experience. But no, I just wanted to say it's wonderful that I guess you and Rob connected here, and because we were talking about you, and it's like, wow. So here's a guy that's sort of, has done all of these things.
And I think it's really cool, Michael, that you're willing to talk about the things that weren't so terrific, as well as the things that were great. So that, I think, is I'm always thrilled when people are really willing to share, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I can't believe you got through the Frank Zappa audition without just completely falling apart. I think anybody would have.
It makes for a wonderful story, and that whole experience, and just I can remember it like it's yesterday. Frank.
Sure.
On the phone, on the rotary phone, with Frank's voice. This is Frank. That baritone. I'm like, wow. Yeah.
So you really didn't think it was a friend of yours just pulling your leg for a second? I mean, that didn't cross your mind? You just
no. For some reason, I remember that I really did know that it was him, because I remember somebody gave me this inkling that it was going to happen, and it was kind of the call was kind of waiting to happen. But yeah, and Robin, just as a note, I really appreciate your program and what you're all doing. It's awesome.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to connect, and I do encourage you to really share your stuff, because, you know, it's always good to have that out into the atmosphere. And
speaking of that, so we don't forget, how do people contact you, Michael? Are you on Facebook, or you got a .com site? What do you have?
Yeah, you know, I don't have a .com. I keep on thinking that I should do that, and you're mentioning it is prompting me to do that. But the best thing to do is just to go to my Facebook page, and either friend me or just take a look and have some fun with what's going on that page,
Okay.
or Instagram as well. You can find me at Michael Jochum.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your being with us today, and thank you so much, Michael, for reaching out to me originally, and yeah, let's stay in touch, and thank you, and everybody, thanks for listening, and as soon as we get this posted, you can post, I'll post it on my page, and then you can share it.
Right on, Robin. Thank you both so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks,
it was a
Michael.
great interview, and everyone can check this interview out at Spreaker, SPREAKER.com/RFDI, and within the hour, this will be posted on that site. So by all means, go there, get this interview, and share it with all your friends, your families, your drummer buds, and because it's definitely worth having. And maybe at some point, Michael will come back.
Absolutely. There's more.
I'd love to. Anytime, you guys. I'd love to come back anytime you'll have me.
More to talk about. Stay tuned.
Right. Okay, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mike.